Okay, this is going to be a great video if you're a tightwad like me. So if you want to make digital dentures, and let's say you have the basic Exocad module, right, which is the most affordable. If you get all the modules, it's more than double the price. And so Exocad does have a great denture module. I've made a video on how you can make dentures with that, but it is an add-on module that you've got to have. So what if I told you you could make digital dentures just with the basic crown and bridge module? Well, that's what I'm going to be showing in this video today. Here is the denture that we've created. It's two pieces where you can print the teeth in white and the base in pink. And again, that's all using just basic Exocad with the addition of one step, which we go and do in Blue Sky Plan. That's very easy to do. And the end result is you've got a great two-piece denture. And if you do like content like this, you like digital dentures, you like the digital aspect, go and check out my website at coryglenn.org and go to courses, and you'll see that we do actually have a digital denture course on March 28th and 29th. That's going to be at my farm here in Sewanee, which is always a fun place to do courses. So if you want to learn about dentures and shoot things and blow things up and go into caves and all that kind of stuff, then we'd love to have you go to the website and check it out. All right, let's jump in. So in a previous video, I've shown using Exocad's actual denture module. That is an extra add-on that you would have to purchase. And frankly, if you're willing to do just a couple little steps manually, you can pretty much do the exact same thing in the traditional crown and bridge base module. And so let's go ahead and jump into this. So this is the case that we're going to be doing. This is a patient. It's opposing this lower denture. You can see it's going to be an immediate denture. They've still got tooth number 9 and number 14, I believe that is. And so it'll kind of be an immediate denture. So I'll go through how we can extract those teeth. So let's go ahead and set up our prescription. Just make something up there. So we're going to go from second molar to second molar, and we're going to call this anatomic pontic. You can designate anything you want right here. But this is important. If you do have to do some virtual extractions, then you would want to put yes, but only on the teeth that need to do a virtual extraction. In my case, there's only 2 teeth out of the 12 that we're going to place. And so we don't need to do that for every tooth. So I'm going to say no, but then I'll come back and designate those 2 teeth as something that I do want to take out. Now, the other option that you want to choose is you do want to design a virtual gingiva. All right. And if you had wax rim models or something like that, you could call that either one of these, a pre-op model or an extra gingival scan, or just import it after the fact. All right, so I'm going to do that and apply that to all of these. But then remember, I do want to do a couple of virtual extractions. So this one, I'm going to go back in, and here I do want to designate that I do want to do a virtual extraction. And then I'm going to apply that on to 6 as well. And now we should be ready. So we'll save and then go into design. So we're going to do the upper jaw first, and then we'll bring in the opposing. All right, so go ahead and set your scene view. So I'm just going to get this where it's easily seeing all the upper arch. I'll click next. Uh, if you had pictures and you have the Smile Creator, you could bring those in, but chances are you probably won't have that. So I'm going to skip this. All right, so now it's asking us to do the virtual extractions. All right, so I want to look this tooth over. You can see it's kind of fenestrated out of her gingiva right here. So I'll click on this tooth, and it's going to try to do an automatic segmentation of the tooth, but it does look like it's gone a little excessive. And so I'm going to correct the margin of this. So I'm holding Control, and I'm just erasing away the areas that I don't want it to virtually extract. All right, let's try that. And that's much better. All right, so we'll accept that, click next. And now we'll click on the other tooth that we're extracting. And that looks good. All right, so we had this, but I do see that where it did that, I probably didn't have it fully selected. There is a bit of a wrinkle here. And so I'm going to jump over to expert mode real quick and we can hide the virtual teeth. But I want to come down here and find, let's right click and say freeform scan data. And so this is just going to give you some brushes that you can use. Let's use a smoothing brush and just smooth that little wrinkle out that we had. And this would also be a good place if you have, bubbles in your cast or something like that. I'll just show you right there. We could get rid of those, add, remove, do all that kind of stuff. But that's essentially all I needed to do here. So now I can jump back over to the wizard. All right, so very important step here if you're going to approach it just using the base crown and bridge module. We've got to set our virtual wax up bottom. And one of the very important parts of that is setting your path of insertion. All right, so I want to look into this. I wouldn't want a straight up and down path of insertion because that's going to generate a ton of blockout on the buckle here. And you can control the blockout to a degree, but not 100%. You can't like eliminate all the blockout. And so I want to orient this and then say set my insertion direction from this view. And then we can look around and see. So that's probably the best I can get. I'll still have a little undercut up in the front and just a hair right here, but it's pretty minimal. And then if you look at these two parameters here, so your offset, it's 0.03, which is virtually none. Um, think of that as, essentially when the final denture base is created, what's the spacer gap between your model and that denture base? All right. I'll leave that at its default. I don't change anything here, but this is where you will want to change things. You want to allow the maximum amount of undercut. And so again, you've got control to a degree, but it's going to max out at 0.5 millimeter. Thankfully, that tends to be a pretty acceptable amount of undercut to maintain. And so we're going to go with that. I'll click apply and then we'll go to next. Okay, so you can see here, this is your virtual wax up bottom. This is basically the model that your denture is going to be built on. All right, so you can see there's just a slight amount of undercut that's been blocked out here, a very slight amount of offset and smoothing. But by and large, we've got all of our jaw surface here, so this should work out fine. We're going to click next. And now is when we would place our teeth. So turn your antagonist on and think of where you would want your second molar. It's going to be a little bit distal to the mandibular second molar. All right. And it's always going to go in kind of goofy like this. You can go ahead and choose your library. I'm going to use these HD teeth. I think those are a nice looking set of teeth. And we can go ahead and click next. All right, so hopefully you're familiar with just using basic Exocad, but this is going to be your tooth chain. And so I'm going to pull it down here just in the neighborhood of where the centrals ought to be. And now I'll use the chain. And what I like to do is just go one side at a time. So I'll lock the opposite central and I'm going to pull this guy up. And it's going to take a few movements to get this right. All right, so if I unlock the chain, obviously that is terrible looking. And so what I'm going to do now is, oops, hold control, and I'm going to spin these teeth around and try to get their orientation back in the right position. We can pull that down and in towards the mandible. Again, I'm holding control. All right, so I'm generally going to try to go ahead and get my centrals pretty much where I want them. Right, and you've always got the option if the chain rotation stuff is not working to your liking, you can go to manual. Right, that That looks about where those centrals ought to be emerging from. The axial inclination looks pretty good. And so I'm going to turn the chain back on now. And with those centrals in the correct position, let's just go ahead and lock them. And now I'm going to start getting much closer on the position of my teeth. All right, so I'm going to look from here, rotate that out, pull down here, and now I'm going to fix all of these inclinations. Actually, before I do that, let's lock that premolar tooth that we pulled into the right position. These need to be bowed down some. These need to be bowed down quite a bit. And now I'm going to fix the inclination. So holding control, I'm just pulling the teeth in the direction I would like. That all looks pretty decent. Okay, so think about where you would want to, alter your chain from. So first of all, these need to come outward. Get your midline lined up, which I'm just using the lower teeth as a reference because that was a relatively new denture that she had made, and things were in the right position already. So the midline is pretty good on that lower. Okay, and the canines are pretty much where I would like them. Again, I'm going to lock both my centrals to not screw them up. This canine does need to come down some, and that canine needs to come down some as well. Let's see if they need to go out any. This one can come in some. The reason I'm locking those centrals is because more than any other teeth, those centrals, if they're not mirror images of one another, it's going to throw the aesthetics off. So I can vary the, contralateral canines and the laterals even, but those centrals need to be exactly the same. So you could use the symmetry tool. I find it just easier to position them together, lock them in place, and then, hopefully that won't alter during the design process. All right, so the canine is roughly where I would like it on each side. I'm going to pull those laterals down later, but by locking the canine, now I can grab this and I can start scaling the posterior teeth. All right, so remember, mesial buccal cusp of the maxillary molar in the buccal groove of the lower first molar. If you want to rotate it a little bit, you can. All right, and then same thing here. Now, if I look from the posterior, you're going to see I don't have these lingual cusps occluding in the central groove of the posterior teeth. And so I'm going to move them out laterally. And then I can bow this up again as well. So if I'm looking from the underside, that's not a terrible job of positioning these teeth. I do need to bring this out. All right, so again, think about your mesial lingual cusp should be occluding right in the central fossa of the molars. And so that one is now in the correct position. This molar, now it's in the right position. And then your lingual cusp should be more or less in the central groove and marginal ridge areas of the opposing premolars. And that doesn't look too bad. All right. And while I've got this locked, let's go ahead and pull this lateral down. All right, if I think about a line from canine tip to central, I would want that lateral about half a millimeter off of it. Okay. All right, so I'm starting to like the way things are looking. Now, one thing to consider on dentures, they move, right? So if you have a really deep, highly anatomic occlusion, those teeth are going to sock together and not give the patient any freedom of movement out of that, and it's going to destabilize the dentures. And so another thing you can do if you go over here to advanced, you've got the option to alter the steepness of the anatomy. And so I don't generally alter the anteriors very much, but I'm going to take these posteriors and flatten them down some. All right. So just by doing that, you can see that really helped the occlusion on the molars, and that is looking pretty nice. If I go back here, I like the positioning of well, actually, I don't like the positioning of these. I'm gonna open my chain again. See, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have unlocked my centrals because I want to use those as like a hinge point, basically. And so looking here, these need to come inward some. If I do that too much, it's going to alter my canine position. So I'll just pull in from here. And now that's looking much better. So I am leaving the occlusion heavy right now, but what I'm looking right now is do I have an appropriate amount of, overlap to the buccal? And I don't on these teeth. So I'm going to bow those out a little. And now what I was going to do just a moment ago is some tooth scaling. All right. So if you go to the simple tooth movement, you can go to scale. So it's only going to change scaling, but then I don't really want to alter my total tooth scaling, mesial distal, because remember, I've already got them lined up in the grooves and everything, but these upper teeth do look too small to me. So what I can do is just scale these in a buccal lingual direction only. So now each tooth, as I hover on it, I can stretch and get some more appropriately sized teeth. Right. And now go back into my chain and let's see how things are lining up. So I can bring these teeth up some. And I want to just get things in the mostly uh, in the bluish greenish zone. And so all of these I can bow outward. All right, that's right where I would want that occlusal contact. You can do individual tooth movements, right? So right there would be where I'd want that one. And this tooth, you can kind of see when you go buccal to lingual, you want that cusp tip right in that central groove. So that looks pretty good. I made that movement a minute ago. I did get my lateral and canine on this side quite a bit bigger than this one, so I'm going to pull those back some again. And I can tilt them just a little bit to deal with some of that occlusal interference. So that looks pretty symmetric to me. All right. So if you need to start, getting your occlusion a little closer, I'd just lock every other tooth and you can bring that up vertically. I'd like to not see much other than the blues and greens. Oops, that tooth's pretty good. And if I do have some isolated spots of, really heavy occlusion, that's okay as well because I can adjust that in the next step where we have more fine tooth control. These two look pretty good. Okay, we can work with that. And now here's one other thing you can consider is if you've done a denture, you know that a lot of times, well, not even a lot of times, you always need that connector because you want this horseshoe of teeth to be all connected. Now you can do that with connectors later on in the process, but your- excuse me. But your other option is you could scale these in just a mesial distal direction, just enough so that they actually bump into one another. All right, we're not looking to go crazy here, but just by doing that, we're going to have pretty good connection between the teeth. And then you could forego using connectors. Right? So that would work. So I'm going to go ahead now and move on to my next design phase. This is where I've got more fine control over, the shapes of the teeth and everything. Now, the first thing that I always like to do, think about a denture. You know, you don't want to have these teeth sticking way, way out where you've got to make a ton of gingiva to cover the necks of the teeth. So one of the very first things I'll do is go to anatomic and I'm going to lock the equators of the teeth. All right. And then looking from inside my model, I'm going to pull the necks of these teeth over underneath the ridge. And that's going to make it a lot easier to do, your gingival festooning. All right. Now, if I was to start using the cusp tool, I can begin pulling certain cusps down where I see that things are too high. I can sometimes pull a cusp outward to give it a bit more room. All right, you can use the tooth parts. And let's say if we wanted to relieve that just a bit, we can do so here. So like this margin ridge where it's a bit tall. I'm going to pull that down. Definitely this marginal ridge. Pull that downward. And this one. And then you can also just use your add and remove. And so when I have it all to green, now I'm going to use the remove tool uh, to basically bring this down. So I'm holding shift and I'm going to just do some single clicks because I'd like to get all that kind of in a uh, dark blue, just barely in contact. All right. And the more little points of contact you have, the better, uh, that denture is going to be socked in. And the reason I'm using the remove tool as opposed to smooth, um, could you smooth it out? Yeah, definitely. But watch what happens. Like if I try to smooth this spot away, all my anatomy goes with it. All right, so Control Z, and I'm going to use remove instead. I can easily alter the spot size. And by doing that, that's just keeping me from losing my anatomy. Now, something like this on a lingual surface where it's mostly smooth anyway, sure, use the smooth tool. That would be fine. But on occlusal surfaces, I want to stick to my remove tool mostly. Okay, so everything is in the blue now on my occlusion. And if we wanted to adapt, we can now do that. But uh, before we do the occlusion, there's another step you're going to do. So remember, part of the, uh, I guess, downside to using this basic crown and bridge module is that um, it's not going to allow you to subtract out the teeth from the base, leaving the sockets, right? That's the one step that we're going to have to do manually in another program, be it Blue Sky Plan or Mesh Mixer or whatever you want to use. Um, there's a way in Exocad, it's very convoluted, it's not worth doing there. But regardless, because you don't have that functionality, it's also not going to build in a path of draw on these teeth. So I want you to imagine these teeth have got to have a path of draw to drop into the sockets of the base. And when we have these sharp areas like here, especially these large overhanging lingual surfaces, that's just not going to drop in there. And so I would definitely recommend that you get, a smoothing tool with a big spot size and, all of this is going to be buried up under the gingiva. I would get rid of all the hard angles, and I just want to max out my strength here and use a pretty aggressive tool to smooth that out. Especially, again, think looking down from the lingual, it's going to be undercut on most of these lingual surfaces. So I'm going to go ahead and just try to smooth those back as much as possible. I'm certain I won't eliminate all of them, but the more I do here, the less adjustment I'll have to do to get the tooth chain to fit into the base. And the easier the fit's going to be, when you do go to fit the base and the teeth together. Okay, so you can see that all pretty much was isolated to just you know, the intaglio portion of the tooth where it's going to fit into the base. But definitely do that because that's going to really make your bonding much easier later on. All right, so we'll call that good. Now we could go to adapt. So let's first of all adapt the occlusion. Generally, I go with the default, which is to cut in 0.1 millimeters beyond a dead zero, so static occlusion. And by virtue of the fact that I got everything in the blue before doing that, I don't have these hard cutouts in here like that was an area of contact. And you can see it's difficult to even see that. So get everything down into the blue before you do any occlusion adapting. Otherwise, you're going to have sharp spots in your occlusion. And then this is one other really important step, your basal. All right. I want you to look at the jaw scan here. If you've ever printed a denture base and it ended up either having a hole through the base right where the tooth bonds, or it was just paper thin there, that's because there was not enough spacer between the teeth themselves and the jaw. Okay, so the base can only occupy the space that's between the teeth and the jaw. And so we want to adapt the basal of these teeth, and I would suggest that you do a pretty aggressive adapting, like create 1 millimeter of relief all around that. All right. So if I apply this, it's going to give me a warning because usually it wants to do this later on. We're kind of hacking this. And now you can see that that's going to maintain, a millimeter of space where that gingiva can occupy, and you'll have a solid bottom to the fitting surface in your base where the teeth go. All right. So that's a really important step. If you don't do that, you're going to create a lot of work for yourself manually in Mesh Mixer or some program before you can do any bonding. All right. Now, since I did that, that's created a lot of hard surfaces again. And so I'm going to go back again with my smoothing tool, smooth those out. Smooth surfaces are easier to fit than, hard angled surfaces. And you can be especially aggressive on this lingual surface, right? Because you're typically going to end up, flowing gingival resin, or, in your festooning, you're going to cover the necks of the teeth right there. And so there's no problem with being excessively aggressive there. I would be careful of going too crazy on the buckle. That looks pretty good. And if you're worried that in your smoothing that you might have gotten it too close to the model again, you can always just go back again to adapt, reapply that, and you'll see it'll probably cut away some spots again. But now it's going to not be so excessive, and it's the edges where we're primarily concerned. All right, so we can work with that. That'll work. Um, I'm going to go ahead now and click next. And it's asking me to do the approximals. I don't want to adapt the proximals because I actually want those barely touching for my tooth chain. So click next. I don't want to adapt this to any pre-op models, so I'm going to skip by that step. And now it's where we're going to make our gingival base. All right, so go ahead and just start flicking your way around where you want your gingival base. Now this was on an alginate, so probably wouldn't want to go all the way to the vestibule because it's overextended somewhat. One stray point over here. All right. Think about your vibrating line, like you might have marked it in your impression. If not, you can look for like the fovea palatine. Move that dot. I double clicked a little bit before I was ready to. Um, but this is another step where again we're hacking this base crown and bridge module to do this. It's not truly intended for this purpose. So your base thickness, 1 millimeter is way too thin for a digital denture. All right. I think you want to bump this thing on up. I'd probably do like a 1.75 cervical thickness and then like a 2 millimeter base thickness. That's the max it will let you do, but we can manually just thicken that up where we need to. So apply that before you proceed. All right, so there's our initial base. I'm going to go ahead and click next, and the rest of it we'll do just manually. All right. So remember, anywhere that I shrink it beyond 2 millimeters, it's going to, not show up as yellow. For example, I like to just start kind of fresh by smoothing everything. So maximum strength, and I'm going to smooth all of this. And you'll probably eventually see me poke through that minimum 2 millimeter thickness in places. A few isolated areas of 2 millimeters, like right there. You see that? So that's telling me I'm getting thinner than 2 millimeters. And if they're just isolated spots, that's really not a problem. But you don't want to have a lot of it, uh, where it's excessively thin like that. So let's go ahead and bulk up the edges in particular. So right here at your border, that's going to be the area where these tend to end up thin. And so I'm just going around. I'm going to thicken all of that up. And then like that area right there just needs some general thickening. And just so you kind of know what to expect here, right now you see that this base is overbuilt. It didn't try to adapt it. And so it's deceiving if you think this is the internal of your denture. What's going to happen is in the final step, it's going to subtract out that virtual wax up bottom, which is very close to this tan model here. It's going to do a hard subtraction away from that. And so my thickness is not going to represent any of this pinkish color right here. That's all going to be cut away. And so if you want to have borders that are not too thin, then you better bulk this stuff up. And then the other area that you really need to bulk up is back here on the posterior area. And then maybe go kind of a once over in the palate. And now I'm going to smooth all that back out again. So I've thickened it, but I do want to still keep it smooth. Okay, we're good there. And now I'm going to start covering up the necks of my teeth a little bit. Now, don't go crazy on the lingual here because remember, those teeth are going to be undercut here. And if you go crazy with it, that's just going to be areas you have to adjust by hand to get your tooth chain to fit. And so I'm going to bulk this up, but I'm not going to try to like completely cover the necks of the teeth because when I bond these together, I'm going to do so using, more of the denture-based resin, and that's going to give me the ability to fill in any little gaps. All right, so smooth this out. I also try not to worry too much about trying to fill in these interproximal gaps. There's no point in that. That's going to get filled in during your bonding process, and so I would just more or less leave that alone. All right, now we can start using these tools to, thicken up the gingiva. If I use the anatomic large area tool, that's going to obviously affect a larger area. So right there where it's pretty thin, I'm going to thicken that up. Bring that area out. This area out. Smooth it again. And to be quite honest, you could stop right here and it's going to be perfectly fine because anything else that you do could be taken care of during your bonding process, right? If you feel like there's not enough material around the necks of these teeth, like just flow some on and cure it. That will work perfectly fine. What I am going to do is use this small area, and I would like to not cover a ton of the necks of the teeth on the facial, so I can take this and I'm just dragging that facial side up. All right, I'm creating a thin spot there, so I'm going to Control Z and undo that one. But I don't want to end up with these super tiny little teeth, um, that look like they're being swallowed by a sea of pink. It's very easy to add to, but you really can't take away to any degree. So I'm going to expose the facials of these more so. Now, if you don't want to have to add material manually, then maybe you want to pull some extra material proximally, and that wouldn't be a problem to do that. Just going to thicken that back up to get my minimum 2 millimeter thickness. And you can also, manually add material using the add tool wherever you think it's appropriate. So if you were intent on kind of filling your proximals more, just look at it from an occlusal view and just kind of sit on it for a second to let that material build up right there. Okay. So honestly, that would be where I would probably stop. Um, doing this on an actual clinical case. Let me just do, say, the anterior six teeth. If you did want to do more festooning and kind of make it look a little fancier, um, which I find most patients don't care about, but whatever, I'll show it. If you use your add and remove tool and get like a small spot size like this, and I wouldn't go so aggressive on the strength. It's easier to go low strength, and then I'm going to just kind of roll around the necks of these teeth. I'm not wanting to cover the teeth anymore. I'm just creating a gingival roll around them. Okay. And then it's always going to be a bit harsh. And so low strength, large smoothing tool, just kind of roll over that. And you can see that that creates a bit of a gingival roll. If you want to do like necks of teeth, then for example, we'll do it just on centrals and laterals. So that root prominence, I would just kind of use my add tool, relatively low strength, and just roll over this area. So the strength is too low there. So I'm going to bump that up. And you'll just have to play with these tools, getting used to how they operate can be a bit challenging. And so just play with it. And if you don't like what you just did, hit Control Z and undo it. All right, so that looks pretty harsh, but I'll smooth it. All right, so you get the idea. I don't really want to waste a bunch of time, on festooning because frankly, again, I wouldn't do this on a clinical case. I would do this using resin after I have printed this. Okay, so that's probably good enough. I did end up, as I was pulling some gingiva, I ended up kind of adding a lot to the lingual here, so I am going to bump that back down because again, I know that I'll have to end up um, grinding a lot of that away to get this thing to fit. So I'm just using the remove tool and melting that material down in those areas. Okay, so we're going to call that good. So I'm going to click next. So this is where if you did what I suggested earlier and you actually made the teeth impinge on one another, you may not have to do any connectors. Um, if you didn't do that, then you are going to need some connectors if you hope to have this thing, connect together. So usually I'll look from the apical side. I want these right in the middle of the teeth. On your anteriors, err a little bit more towards the lingual, because if it's on the facial, that's going to show more. But the posteriors, just get it right in the middle. And then also come back and look at it from this dimension and make sure that, those connectors are not going to, kind of blunt out your papillae areas. So I try to pull it apical enough that it's not shining through on the occlusal surface. That looks pretty good. And you can also, if this is too big of a connector, just change your minimum area of the connector width, and that will allow you to not have so much material there. All right. So that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and click next. So I had to pause my recording here for a bit, and so it looks like I might have jumped steps, but all that's happened here is that the merging of that restoration where I left off, it's just completed and I've accepted it. So here we are, we're back at the end. So this is the final result. And as you can see, Exocad has merged this. Remember, it thinks it's doing a wax up. And so it's just merged this all into one piece, and now we have basically a monolithic denture. And so this is great if you want to do monolithic denture, you're done. That would be the end of it. But if you want a two-piece denture, again, we're kind of hacking the denture module. And so here's where I'm going to have to deviate and go to whatever other program you want to do a Boolean subtraction, because we're going to have to subtract the teeth and subtract the base. And so I'm actually going to show this in Blue Sky Plan. I think the Boolean operations are a little bit easier there. But before I do that, I need to go ahead and export all of my stuff. And so go up here to save, export scene to mesh. And I'm going to just create a folder on my downloads. I'm gonna call this monolithic denture. I always use the original coordinate system. And then remember, we've also got to have our teeth. And so here is just my teeth and connectors, which I want to export those both together. So I'll go up here, export scene to mesh. Right. And with that, we're basically done in Exocad. I'm going to shut it down. And now that that's complete, I'm going to go ahead and launch Blue Sky Plan. So on the home screen of Blue Sky Plan, let's go ahead and just launch into Model Master, and we're just going to import models. Okay, so what models do I want to import? I'm going to just bring in the monolithic dentures and the teeth and connectors that I just created in Exocad. So it's going to want to align these, and there's really not a great alignment for denture stuff, but we could just call this a dentate model. and basically just orient this something like that. You just kind of want it in the same orientation as this head now. All right, so I will finish that. Um, it is worth mentioning if you're going to do this and you've designed an upper and a lower, then you would bring those in at the same time as well. Because as you can see, I just kind of changed the orientation from what, Exocad understood the orientation, and I've changed it to blue skies. So if you don't do this, it's going to your upper and lower denture, if you were to open those, they're not going to be properly related to one another. They'll still work fine, but you probably want them oriented to one another. And so I've only got the one. We're just going to keep it here, but bring all of those in if you're doing upper and lower. So we'll finish. All right. So let's look at what we've got here. Here's our monolithic denture. Here is our teeth and connectors. Now, and it's actually, it renders so clean here, you can't see this. So I'm going to jump and just open that same file in Mesh Mixer just because I want you to see one thing about how this is oriented. Okay, so I've just opened that same teeth and connectors file in Mesh Mixer just because I wanted you to notice, Exocad does not merge the connectors to the teeth when you export them individually like this. I wish they did, but they don't. And so, if you were to look, like I should be able to click this, hit expand to connected, and it beat all of it, but it's not. All right, I could show you this. Connectors export from Exocad like this. And so this is not a solid model. And kind of one of the basic rules of doing any kind of Boolean function is that you really want to have solid models subtracting from one another. All right. So how can I do that? Well, Blue Sky makes it really easy. If you come over here to model manipulation, make sure you've selected your teeth and connectors or whatever that is that you've saved it as. And let's just say close model. Okay, so as you can see, there's kind of some stippling here between the models, and the reason for that is that the original is still turned on. All that it's done is it's basically taken those teeth and connectors, which were all a bunch of individual surfaces mashed together. It's just turned this into one solid model. All right, and that's what we want to deal with. So now with that done, we want to do our Boolean function. All right, so a lot of people are unaware that we have Boolean functions in Blue Sky Plan. Um, I'm going to go ahead and open those up. So you would come up here to your where you change modules, and let's change from model master over to crown and bridge. That's where you'll find the Boolean functions. All right. And if you have your teeth editing panel open, you can go to panel, teeth editing. Right here, you see it's a collapsed menu, but that's where we would do this. Okay, so I have my yellow solid teeth and connectors, and I have my blue solid monolithic denture. We want to do a Boolean difference between the denture. Always select that first, the model you're going to take away from, and then what model do you want to subtract from it? I want to do that yellow model. And this is where you could have done this just as easily in Mesh Mixer, except for this part. You would have had to have gone and offset it. Imagine if you create just a dead zero subtraction, well, those teeth are never going to fit into the sockets. They need a tiny bit of slop space. If you've ever made a surgical guide, you probably know that there's like a zero point 0.2 spacer gap between the teeth and the guide that allows it to sit on there passively. Well, we need the same kind of fitting interface between the teeth and the denture base. So if I do this, I can create that with the offset in Blue Sky Plan. All right, so I could just punch in how much of an offset do I want. For my printers, 0.2 millimeters seems to be great. And now I just simply click apply. And it actually happens a lot quicker and it's less prone to errors than when you do that in Mesh Mixer. And so I really prefer to do this here. And since it's all model work, there's no export charges or anything like that associated with it. All right. So now, if I go into my surfaces panel, remember the blue is the original monolithic denture. Green was the teeth and connectors, which we made solid using blue sky. And so now the yellow is our tooth chain, all right? And then by just doing that Boolean subtraction, check out what we've made here, all right? This is our denture base with sockets, right? And looks good. I do have some little floating bits, which, you could remove those any number of ways. I'm just going to go back to Model Master. You could cut them out individually, but the easiest way is just to click on Isolate and now just click on your denture itself. All right, and all those little floating bits go away. All right, so now I'm just going to export these and they should be ready for printing. My new teeth, because remember, printers are always going to play nicer with solid models, so I don't want to use my original individual surfaces for the teeth and connectors. I'm going to export my new solid teeth and connectors and this new solid base that has the sockets. So I can go to export data, and we can just say we're wanting to export these two files, but do them as separate files, not all like collapsed into one. All right, so check that little box right there, and now we can just tell it where we want to save that. And I'm going to do it in the same spot in that little folder I just created. All right, and now you see that. So it's going to just export them with the name that you had them in Blue Sky Plan. I'm going to change this to denture base with sockets, and I'll just call this solid tooth chain. And now let's open those up so that you can take a look at them. Now I'm going to import the denture base. So I think you can see here that little spacer that we were able to use Blue Sky to build in. Do you see right here? That is that 0.2 offset spacer that is going to allow this to seat in there passively. Now, here's what you need to understand about if you're going to do dentures this way. Obviously, they're still undercuts, right? That there's no way that tooth chain is going to seat into this base with that little bit right here, that little bit right here. So when I print this base, I'll just print it as is, knowing that I'm going to have to just take a handpiece and just grind off some stuff. So what I'm typically going to do, I'm not super careful about it. I'm going to take that handpiece and I'm going to grind off more or less the lingual aspect of these proximal areas throughout, right? Anything, it's got to have a path of draw. So I ought to be able to look in here and pretty much see all of that fitting surface where the tooth chain's going to go. That's got to go. That's got to go. These little bits, I'm just going to buzz those. It takes 10 seconds. It's really easy to do. And then I'll test fit my tooth chain. All right. I just need to make sure that my tooth chain, after it's printed and the base is printed, that everything goes together properly. And really at that point, it's simply a matter of just printing the case. I've got the sprint ray open right now just because I was doing some denture bases earlier. So for example, just select denture base resin, import your denture base with sockets, print that, make your little adjustments I was talking about, and then you would need to print the base as well. And so when I print these, this is how they're going to be oriented, always with the intaglio facing up, right? I already know that I'm going to build or that I'm going to be doing some adjustments on this surface. So it's going to connect a support to all these little sharp areas. I already know I'm adjusting there. I'd rather not have a little support bump potential on the internal surface of this. And generally, those support bumps are going to be on these sharp interproximal peaks, which you can adjust away anyway. And so this is the way you would want to do that when you do your teeth, even though I wouldn't do these in the same resin, obviously. But when I do print the teeth, regardless what printer you're going to use to do this, you want to orient your teeth occlusal surface down on the build plate, right? And I mean, they can be kind of flat so that it prints quicker. But this way, when I do supports on everything, if you notice here, all of the support bumps are going to be, for the most part, on those proximal peaks, which I'm going to adjust anyway. But on the teeth, I would rather have a clean interface where the teeth are going to fit in there. Okay. So no matter what, whenever you print dentures, before you start bonding everything together, make sure you've got a really intimate fit. A little support bump might be in there, or an undercut area that's not allowing things to seat properly. Make all those adjustments before you start your bonding process, because otherwise it's going to change the fit and occlusion of your denture. All right. So anyway, hopefully you found that helpful. If you are making dentures and you have Exocad, but you maybe don't want to spring for the denture module of it, this is the way you can get it done. It works just fine, but you are going to have to jump to an outside program to do that one step of the Boolean difference. All right, so hope you found that helpful. We'll see you later.